It was supposed to be a quiet graveyard shift in a rundown city hospital. But when 5 heavily armed gang members barricaded the ER and put a gun to a quiet trauma nurse's head, they made a fatal miscalculation. They didn't just take a hostage, they trapped a predator. At 2:14 a.m. on a rain-slicked Tuesday, the emergency room of Mercy General Hospital in South Chicago was a sanctuary of fluorescent hums and the quiet beeping of heart monitors. Audrey Reynolds stood at the stainless steel counter of Trauma Bay, 3 methodically scrubbing a pair of trauma shears with bleach wipes. She was 34, with cold, analytical gray eyes, and dark hair pulled back into a tight, no-nonsense bun. To the hospital staff, Audrey was the unflappable charge nurse. She was the one who never panicked when a multi-car pileup flooded the floor, the one who could find a vein on a severely dehydrated burn victim in total darkness. What the staff of Mercy General did not know, what no one outside of a highly classified Department of Defense database knew, was that before Audrey wore hospital scrubs, she wore desert Marpat camouflage. Before she pushed IV fluids, she pushed 300-grain Sierra Match King hollow points through the barrel of a Macmillan TAC 338 sniper rifle. As a gunnery sergeant attached to a Marine Special Operations Command MARSOC task force in the Al Anbar province, Audrey had 85 confirmed kills. She had spent 5 years mastering the art of blending into shadows, calculating windage, and ending human lives from a mile away. She left the military to put blood back into people instead of letting it out. But tonight, the war was coming to her. The first warning was the screech of heavy tires skidding across the wet pavement of the ambulance bay, followed immediately by the explosive shattering of safety glass. A matte black Cadillac Escalade reversed violently through the sliding double doors of the ER entrance, twisting the aluminum frame into jagged shrapnel. The waiting room erupted into screams. Dr. Jonathan Evans, a brilliant but soft-spoken third-year resident, froze in the hallway, his chart slipping from his hands. 5 men piled out of the decimated vehicle. They moved with a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled aggression. They weren't street corner thugs. They were members of the South End Syndicate, a ruthless Midwestern trafficking operation known for their heavy ordnance and absolute lack of hesitation. The leader, a broad-shouldered man named Leo Fisher, stepped into the harsh hospital lighting. He was clutching a customized AR-15 rifle. His tailored leather jacket was completely soaked in dark arterial blood. Beside him, 2 of his men, Mace and Trent, were dragging a 4th man, Gareth, who was leaving a thick, slick trail of crimson across the linoleum floor. Gareth had taken a 5.56 millimeter round straight through the upper thigh, severing the femoral artery. The 5th man, a jittery, wire-thin enforcer named Wyatt, immediately leveled a Glock 19 with an extended 30-round magazine at the triage desk. "Nobody move! Nobody make a damn sound!" Leo roared, his voice echoing off the tile walls. Stan, the 50-year-old hospital security guard, instinctively reached for the Motorola radio on his hip. Wyatt didn't even blink. He snapped his wrist and fired a single round. The 9mm bullet tore through Stan's right shoulder, spinning the older man around and sending him crashing into a row of plastic waiting chairs. A young triage nurse named Harper shrieked, dropping to her knees and covering her head. "Shut up!" Wyatt screamed, advancing on her and pressing the searing hot barrel of the Glock against the back of Harper's neck. "Where's the doctor? I blow her brains out in 3 seconds if a doctor doesn't step up." 1. Wyatt counted his finger, tightening on the trigger. Dr. Evans stood paralyzed. His breath caught in his throat, unable to command his legs to move. 2. I've got him, a calm, chillingly steady voice cut through the panic. Audrey stepped out of trauma bay, 3, her hands raised, palms open, showing no weapons. She didn't look at the gun. She didn't look at Wyatt's aggressive posture. Her eyes locked directly onto Leo's. In a split second, her military training processed the room: 5 hostiles, 1 wounded. Primary weapon, AR-15. Secondary weapons, 9mm Glocks. Wyatt is tweaking on meth pupils, dilated, erratic, twitching. Leo is the command structure. "Let the girl go," Audrey said, her voice dropping an octave, devoid of any fear. "You're wasting time. Your man has a severed femoral. He's in class 3 hemorrhagic shock. He has about 4 minutes before his heart stops from blood loss. Bring him to Bay 3, now." Leo stared at the nurse. He was used to civilians sobbing, begging, or freezing. Audrey's icy composure threw him off balance, but the gurgling sound coming from Gareth snapped him back to reality. "Get him in there," Leo barked at Mays and Trent. He pointed his AR-15 at Dr. Evans. "You too, Doc. You move, you die. Wyatt, lock the main doors. Trent, confiscate every cell phone from these people and zip tie them to the chairs. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out." The ER was officially a hostage situation. As Mace and Trent hauled the dying man onto the stainless steel operating table, Audrey snapped on a pair of blue nitrile gloves. The transition was seamless. The compassionate nurse was gone. The Recon Marine was awake, and she was already calculating the mathematics of survival. Under the blinding halogen surgical lights of Bay 3, the smell of copper and sweat was suffocating. Gareth was thrashing on the table, his face the color of wet ash. "Hold him down," Audrey commanded. Dr. Evans, pale and trembling, leaned his weight onto Gareth's chest. Leo stood just 3 feet away, the muzzle of his AR-15 pointed directly at the floor, his finger resting lazily inside the trigger guard. "Save him, nurse, or I swear to God I'll paint this room with your brains." Audrey ignored the threat. Words meant nothing. Actions dictated reality. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears and ripped Gareth's blood-soaked denim jeans open. The wound was catastrophic. Dark blood was pulsing rhythmically from the tear in the artery. "Evans, I need a 14-gauge IV in his left. AC, push a liter of lactated ringers wide open and get a gram of TXA ready." Audrey barked, her hands moving with blinding speed. She grabbed a roll of quick-clot combat gauze and jammed her fingers directly into the gunshot wound, applying crushing manual pressure against the pelvic bone to pinch the severed artery. Gareth let out a feral, agonizing howl. "Shut him up!" Mace yelled from the doorway, pacing nervously, clutching his Glock. While Audrey held the artery, her mind was rapidly constructing a tactical map of the emergency department. She was trapped in the center of the kill zone. Mace is guarding the hallway, holding a fatal funnel. Trent is in the waiting room with the civilian hostages. Wyatt is near the pharmacy lockbox, trying to pry it open for narcotics. Leo is hovering. Audrey shifted her weight. "He's stabilized the bleeding for now, but his pressure is tanking, 60/40. He's lost too much volume," she said, looking up at Leo. "He needs O-negative blood right now, or his organs shut down. We only keep 2 units in the trauma fridge. I need to go to the basement blood bank to get a massive transfusion cooler." Leo's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, the smell of stale cigarette smoke and cordite rolling off him. "You think I'm stupid, lady? You're not going anywhere. Look at the monitor, Audrey stated coldly, nodding her chin toward the screen displaying a rapidly flattening waveform. That's his heart giving up. You want him alive? I need blood. Send one of your men with me. I don't care. But if we don't go now, you'll be carrying a corpse out of here. Leo stared at the monitor, then at Gareth's lifeless face. He cursed under his breath. Wyatt, he yelled over his shoulder. The twitchy enforcer jogged into the bay, his eyes wide. Yeah, boss. Go with the nurse to the basement. She tries anything, shoot her in the spine. Leave her down there. Got it, Wyatt smirked, racking the slide of his Glock 19 to chamber a round. He pressed the barrel hard against Audrey's lower back. Move, Florence Nightingale. Audrey lifted her hands, keeping them visible, and walked out of the trauma bay. As she passed the triage desk, she made eye contact with Harper, who was bound to a chair with plastic zip ties, tears streaming down her face. Audrey gave her a microscopic nod, a silent promise. The walk to the basement was a descent into silence. The elevators were disabled due to the lockdown, so they had to take the maintenance stairwell. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. With every step down the concrete stairs, the persona of Audrey the nurse stripped away completely. Wyatt was behind her, breathing heavily, the barrel of the gun occasionally bumping against her spine. It was a rookie mistake. A trained operator never puts their weapon in contact with a hostile target. It bridges the distance, offering leverage. Keep moving, Wyatt hissed. Don't try to be a hero, sweetheart. The blood bank is through these doors, Audrey said evenly, pushing open the heavy fire doors that led into the subterranean level of the hospital. The hallway was lined with supply cages and industrial laundry carts. It was isolated, soundproof, perfect. She walked over to the massive glass-fronted refrigeration unit labeled blood storage. Wyatt followed his eyes darting around the empty basement, his paranoia amplified by the drugs in his system. Open it, grab the bags, and let's go, Wyatt commanded, standing about 2 feet behind her right shoulder. Audrey reached for the heavy chrome latch of the refrigerator. On the metal shelf next to the fridge sat a heavy solid steel D-size oxygen cylinder. Observe, orient, decide, act. Audrey opened the fridge door. As the cold air spilled out, she purposely fumbled a clear plastic bin of saline bags, sending it crashing to the tile floor. Hey, watch it! Wyatt yelled, his eyes instinctually dropping to the floor for a fraction of a second to follow the movement of the falling objects. That microsecond was all she needed. Audrey pivoted on her left heel with explosive, violent speed. Her right hand shot out, not striking Wyatt, but grabbing the heavy steel barrel of his Glock 19. With a brutal twist, she wrenched the weapon outward, snapping Wyatt's wrist and redirecting the muzzle away from her body. Wyatt let out a shocked gasp as his trigger finger broke inside the guard. Before he could scream, Audrey stepped inside his guard. Her left arm shot upward, the crook of her elbow, wrapping fiercely around Wyatt's throat in a flawless textbook rear naked choke. Wyatt thrashed wildly, his free hand clawing at her arm, but it was like fighting a steel vice. Audrey didn't use brute strength. She used perfect biomechanical leverage, compressing the carotid arteries on both sides of his neck. She dropped her weight, taking Wyatt down to the floor, pinning him behind a large laundry cart out of sight from the hallway windows. She held the choke for precisely 7 seconds. Wyatt's eyes rolled back into his skull, his body going completely limp. Audrey didn't let up. She shifted her grip, using a zip tie she had slipped from the trauma cart earlier, to bind his thumbs together behind his back, rendering his hands useless. She dragged his unconscious body fully into the shadows of the supply cage. She stood up, her breathing perfectly even. Her heart rate hadn't spiked above 70 beats per minute. She reached down and picked up the Glock 19 from the floor. She dropped the magazine, checked the brass, slammed it back into the well, and racked the slide. The metallic clack-clack was the loudest sound in the basement. Audrey flipped the fire selector, checking her corners. She had one gun, 17 rounds, and 4 heavily armed men upstairs holding her people hostage. The sniper was off the leash. The silence in the basement was profound, broken only by the distant rhythmic thrum of the hospital's HVAC system. Audrey stood over Wyatt's bound and unconscious form, the stolen Glock 19 resting comfortably in her grip. The weapon felt like an extension of her own arm, a grimly familiar sensation that instantly bridged the gap between the sterile world of Mercy General and the dusty, blood-soaked valleys of Al Anbar. She checked the chamber, ensuring a round was seated, and seamlessly slid a spare magazine from Wyatt's tactical vest into the pocket of her scrubs. Upstairs in Trauma Bay, the atmosphere was rapidly deteriorating into toxic panic. Leo paced like a caged wolf, his heavy boots squeaking against the blood-slicked linoleum. The heart monitor connected to Gareth was emitting a steady, ominous alarm, a high-pitched whine indicating critically low blood pressure. "Where the hell are they?" Leo snarled, slamming his fist against the stainless steel instrument tray, sending a cascade of surgical clamps clattering to the floor. "It's been 6 minutes." Dr. Evans, still keeping pressure on Gareth's wound, with trembling blood-stained hands, swallowed hard. "If she doesn't get that O-negative blood up here in the next 90 seconds, his organs will enter irreversible ischemic failure. You're going to lose him." Leo leveled the barrel of his AR-15 directly at the doctor's face. "Shut your mouth." Mace, who had been guarding the hallway leading to the elevators, snapped to attention. He was a heavily tattooed enforcer built like a cinder block with a notoriously short temper. "Yeah, boss. Go down to the basement. Wyatt is probably screwing around or getting high off the pharmacy stash. Find them, get the blood, and if that nurse gives you even a fraction of an attitude, put a bullet in her kneecap and drag her up here. Go." Mace nodded, racking the slide of his own weapon, and jogged toward the maintenance stairwell. As he pushed open the heavy fire doors, the oppressive silence of the stairwell swallowed him. "Wyatt." Mace called out, his voice echoing down the concrete shaft. "Hey, idiot, stop playing around. Boss is losing his mind up there." No answer, only the echo of his own heavy footsteps. Mace descended the stairs, his grip tightening on his firearm. He reached the basement level and pushed through the doors, stepping into the dim, flickering light of the subterranean storage area. The corridor was lined with towering metal cages filled with IV fluids, surgical gowns, and specialized medical equipment. "Wyatt," Mace hissed, stepping cautiously. He noticed a plastic bin of saline bags scattered across the floor near the blood bank refrigerator. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Wyatt, I swear to God, if you're..." From the absolute darkness atop a towering stack of industrial laundry carts, Audrey dropped. She didn't shout. She didn't hesitate. She descended with the lethal, silent precision of a falling blade. Before Mace could even register the movement above him, Audrey's boots slammed into his shoulders, driving him violently to the hard tile floor. The impact knocked the wind out of him in a sharp guttural gasp. Mace's gun clattered away, skidding under a metal storage rack. Dazed but enraged, he tried to heave himself upward, throwing a wild, blind punch behind him. He was strong, easily outweighing Audrey by 100 pounds. But brute strength was useless against applied physics. Audrey sidestepped the wild swing, grasped his extended wrist, and pivoted sharply. She applied a brutal wrist lock, using his own momentum to twist his arm behind his back at an unnatural, agonizing angle. Mace screamed a sound that was abruptly cut short as Audrey drove her knee flawlessly into the side of his skull. Mace collapsed instantly unconscious, his massive frame hitting the floor like a felled oak. Audrey stepped back, her breathing still remarkably controlled. She retrieved Mace's weapon, a heavy-duty .45 caliber 1911, and tucked it into her waistband. She then stripped the Motorola two-way radio from his shoulder harness. She pressed the push-to-talk button, waiting a beat before speaking. Upstairs, the radio clipped to Leo's tactical vest crackled to life. Static filled the trauma bay, followed by a calm, chillingly composed voice. Leo froze. Dr. Evans looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. The voice didn't belong to Maze, and it certainly didn't belong to Wyatt. "Who is this?" Leo demanded, his hand instinctively gripping his radio. "Where's Maze?" "Mace is asleep," Audrey's voice echoed through the small speaker, completely devoid of the panic Leo expected from a civilian. "Wyatt is tied up in a supply closet. You sent your men into a blind choke point without covering fire or recon. That was a fatal tactical error." A cold sweat broke out across Leo's forehead. He stared at the radio, his mind struggling to process the impossible reality. "You're the nurse. I was a nurse 10 minutes ago," Audrey replied smoothly. "Right now, I am the consequence of your bad decisions. Your man on the table is out of time. You have two options, Leo. You can drop your weapons, release the hostages, and surrender to the police, who are undoubtedly en route. Or you can stay in my emergency room. But understand this, if you stay, you are not leaving under your own power." "You listen to me, you crazy bitch!" Leo roared, his composure shattering. He aimed his AR-15 wildly at the ceiling. "I have hostages. I have a doctor. I have nurses. I have a waiting room full of people. You try anything, and I start executing them. Do you hear me?" "I hear you panicking," Audrey said, her voice a terrifying whisper of steel. "Check your corners, Leo. I'm already upstairs." The radio clicked off. Panic is a contagious disease, and in the claustrophobic confines of the emergency department, it spread like wildfire. "Trent!" Leo screamed into the hallway, his voice cracking with unprecedented terror. "Trent, get your ass in here right now!" In the waiting room, Trent, the youngest and least experienced member of the syndicate, was already unraveling. He was pacing furiously in front of the zip-tied hostages, his eyes darting at every shadow, his gun shaking in his hands. He heard Leo's frantic screams from the back. "Shut up, everyone, just shut up!" Trent yelled at the hostages, though none of them had made a sound. He began to back away toward the hallway to join Leo, leaving the front doors unguarded. It was exactly what Audrey had anticipated. In the hospital's electrical room, located just off the main administrative corridor, Audrey stood before the primary breaker panel. She had bypassed the security lock in seconds using a pair of trauma shears. She grabbed the massive lever that controlled the ER's primary lighting grid. "Let's change the environment," she whispered to herself. She pulled the lever down heavily. Instantly, the blinding fluorescent lights of the entire emergency department died. A collective scream echoed from the waiting room. A split second later, the backup generators kicked in, bathing the hospital in an eerie blood-red emergency glow. The shadows deepened, turning the familiar hallways into a labyrinth of jagged silhouettes and dark corners. Trent froze in the hallway connecting the waiting room to the trauma bays. The red light cast horrifying, elongated shadows across the walls. "Leo!" Trent shouted, his voice pitching upward in pure terror. "Leo, what's happening?" Audrey slipped out of the electrical room, moving with the absolute silence of a ghost. She bypassed the open corridor instead, cutting through the sterile supply labyrinth that ran parallel to the main hallway. She knew this hospital's blueprint better than she knew the back of her own hand. She emerged directly behind Trent. Before he could turn around, Audrey swung a heavy solid steel IV pole like a baseball bat. The heavy metal base connected with the back of Trent's knees with a sickening crunch. Trent shrieked in agony, his legs buckling instantly. As he fell backwards, Audrey stepped in, grabbing his weapon arm, disarming him with a sharp twist, and delivering a localized, incapacitating strike to his brachial plexus, a cluster of nerves in the shoulder. Trent hit the floor completely paralyzed by pain, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Audrey stepped over him, her eyes fixed on the double doors of Trauma Bay 3. One target left. Inside the bay, Leo was backed into a corner, using Dr. Evans as a human flesh shield. His AR-15 was pressed hard against the doctor's temple. The red emergency lights painted the room in an apocalyptic hue. Gareth's heart monitor had flatlined. The long, continuous beep of a dead man filled the room, amplifying the maddening tension. "Come out!" Leo screamed at the doorway, his eyes wide and bloodshot sweat pouring down his face. "I'll kill him. I swear to God, I'll blow his head off." Audrey stepped into the doorway. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She walked into the open space of the trauma bay with her Glock 19, lowered her posture, relaxed, but coiled with lethal intent. "It's over, Leo," Audrey said, her voice easily cutting through the sound of the flatline monitor. "Your crew is neutralized. Your friend is dead. The building is surrounded." Outside, the wail of police sirens finally pierced the night, rapidly approaching the hospital. Red and blue lights began to flash through the shattered glass of the ambulance bay. "Drop the gun!" Leo screamed, pulling Dr. Evans tighter against his chest. The doctor was weeping silently, his eyes squeezed shut. "Drop it or he dies." "You're not going to shoot him," Audrey said calmly, taking a slow, measured step forward. She was doing the math. Distance 12 feet, windage 0, elevation negligible, weapon 9mm Glock, target area the 3-inch gap between Dr. Evans's shoulder and Leo's ocular cavity. "I'll do it!" Leo roared, his finger tightening on the trigger of the AR-15. Audrey's gray eyes locked onto Leo's. The Recon Marine took over. Time slowed to a crawl. Her breathing stopped at the bottom of her exhale, the natural respiratory pause. The fundamental rule of marksmanship. Front sight focus. Trigger control. In a fraction of a second, Audrey raised her weapon. She didn't hesitate or doubt. She squeezed the trigger. Crack. The deafening gunshot echoed off the tile walls. The 9mm hollow point traveled the 12 feet in a microsecond, passing mere millimeters past Dr. Evans's ear, and struck Leo squarely in the right shoulder joint, perfectly severing his clavicle and shattering his rotator cuff. Leo let out a horrific scream, the sheer kinetic force of the impact spinning him backward. His finger convulsed, sending a burst of 5.56mm rounds harmlessly into the acoustic ceiling tiles as he collapsed to the floor, dropping the AR-15. Dr. Evans fell to his knees, covering his ears, hyperventilating. Audrey stepped forward instantly, kicking the AR-15 away from Leo's reach. She stood over the gang leader, aiming her weapon down at his chest. Leo was writhing in agony, clutching his shattered shoulder, staring up at the nurse in absolute, unadulterated terror. "Triage," Audrey said coldly, looking down at him. "You're a priority 3. You'll live." Suddenly, the shattered double doors of the ER burst open. A dozen heavily armed SWAT officers, led by Sergeant Miller, flooded into the lobby, their tactical flashlights cutting through the red emergency lighting. "Police, drop your weapons. Show me your hands." Audrey smoothly ejected the magazine from her Glock, locked the slide back to show it was empty, and placed the weapon carefully on the stainless steel counter. She raised her hands, turning to face the tactical team. "Hostiles are down," Audrey called out in a clear, authoritative voice. 3 incapacitated in the corridors and basement. 1 gunshot wound to the right shoulder here in Bay 3. The civilian hostages are secured in the waiting room. Sergeant Miller lowered his rifle, slightly blinking in confusion at the carnage. He looked at the heavily armed gang leader, bleeding on the floor, then at the terrified doctor, and finally at the calm, immaculate nurse, standing with her hands raised. Who took them down?" Miller asked, bewildered. Audrey lowered her hands, reaching into her pocket to pull out a pair of fresh blue nitrile gloves. She snapped them onto her wrists with a sharp professional crack. "I'm the charge nurse," Audrey said, stepping past the SWAT team to check Dr. Evans for injuries. "I was just doing my job." What a terrifyingly epic twist of fate. This story proves you should never underestimate the quiet ones, especially those who have walked through the fires of combat. Audrey's transition from a compassionate healer back to an apex predator is nothing short of legendary. If you loved this intense, real-life, inspired tale of tactical brilliance and ultimate justice, smash that like button, share this video with someone who loves a badass hero, and subscribe for more heart-pounding stories every week.